The ocean keeps the kind of secrets that rust can't touch. I learned that the first night I stepped aboard the Ariadne, a white liveried cruise ship with more glass than judgment. Her hull hummed with the careful arrogance of engines that believed in schedules. Her decks were scrubbed so clean, the sky felt obliged to reflect itself back in gratitude. We were meant to sail a simple loop Lisbon to Madeira to Tenerife and back 7 nights of sunrises, the color of fruit and sunsets that behaved like rehearsals for miracles. I told myself I booked it for the air, for the break, for the clean line a horizon can draw through pain. The truth was smaller and more complicated. I wanted a place where Claire and I would be forced to keep each other's company. No door to slam, no friend to call, no work to pretend to be busy with. Just water and days and a marriage that had begun to speak in half phrases. We had been married 10 years by then, and some of those years had been good enough to dignify the rest. She still laughed with her whole face, still read novels like she owed the characters respect. But lately her eyes had learned a new distance. The kind where a person looks at the thing they love and rehearses getting along with it without being seen by it. I told myself we were tired. I told myself her silence was seasonal, like oranges or regret. The Ariadne shrugged herself into the Tagus at dusk, lights waking in strands along her railings. A gull coasted at our stern as if audit were a hobby. On deck 10, the band discovered a rhythm and then forgot it. Claire tied her hair with a red scarf and leaned on the rail, the river sliding past Lisbon's old bones beneath us. "Look at them," she said softly, nostrils flaring against the diesel. "All those windows. Every one of them is a life we'll never know. And we'll never have to pretend we admire their art," I said. It should have earned a laugh. It earned a thin smile that stopped at her mouth. "Let's try," she said. "Try? To be good to each other," she said, "for a week." "Were we bad?" She didn't answer. A tug cut across our bow and performed the gesture ships use when they'd like to be saluted. The band found a cord and hung on for dear life. The gull gave up on us and found a trawler whose fish had not learned modesty. Claire's hand found mine, fingers cool, and squeezed a promise or a plea. That night after the safety drill taught us how to become numbers the sea could easily count. We dressed for dinner like people who'd been told the story requires it. The dining room was a cathedral to complicated appetites, chandeliers shaped like obedient waterfalls, waiters who remembered the kind of hunger you'd confessed at lunch, a cello polishing the air beneath conversation. The maitre d' placed us beside a window and gave us a view of water learning to be ocean. That's when I saw him, and the first thread of our week began to pull. He stood 3 tables away, the kind of handsome that makes mirrors want to apologize for being honest. Dark hair, jaw with opinions, a linen jacket that understood money but wasn't enslaved by it. He didn't look at me, and then he did. And then he looked away in a manner that suggested he had cataloged me and filed me under a color my wife liked to wear. "Who's he?" I asked too lightly. Claire pretended confusion and then performed it better. "I haven't a clue," she said, opening her menu as if it were a door. "He looked like he knew us." "He looked like he knows everyone," she said. "Some people are built that way." "Does that include you?" She smiled properly this time. "Only on odd-numbered days." We ate too slowly. We drank too quickly. The ocean practiced its one trick outside the glass, as if repetition were proof of integrity. After dessert, she excused herself to find the wind, an affectionate term for the habit she had of walking decks alone until her thoughts agreed to let her sleep. I watched her go with the possessive tenderness of a man who believes love is a leash the other person enjoys wearing. 10 minutes later, I saw the man in the linen jacket rise from his table and leave through the same door. I told myself 1,000 things in the next 5 minutes, most of them unhelpful. Then I stood, followed the hallway to the starboard promenade, and learned that the kind of courage that begins with suspicion often ends with embarrassment. They weren't together. She stood alone at the rail, hair pulled by wind into a flag of its own country. He stood 10 meters away, talking to a woman in a blue blazer with a clipboard, the ship's guest relations manager, if the badge could be trusted. The woman kept nodding in the manner of people assessing guilt. The man's hands cut the air in sharp, expensive shapes. When he finished, he gave the woman the sort of smile that wins verdicts in rooms without windows. As I turned to leave, Claire glanced back at me, eyes moon-bright. It's too loud to think, she said, and took my arm, and we walked until we found a quieter corner, where the ship's wake trailed us like braided white regret. Everything all right? I asked. Ask me tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow you'll say it was fine. Tomorrow I'll say whatever tomorrow wants. Back in our cabin, she crawled into bed and fell asleep with the kind of violence reserved for people who have negotiated all day with their better angels. I lay awake and let the engine's thrum perform a low massage on my bad decisions. Every hour I got up and checked the door latch, as if betrayal came with a sound you could prepare for. On day 2, the ocean remembered to be beautiful. Sun on the railings, people performing vacation convincingly, children discovering that elevators serve as magic if you let them. Claire and I ate early and walked the jogging track together, counting laps, making fun of the bronze statue of a sea nymph who looked both exhausted and professionally delightful. She reached for my hand without prompting and told me about a painting she couldn't get out of her mind. A harbor at night, the water a sheet of black glass, 3 white boats, 1 red, the painter having the audacity to leave the moon out of it. And the red boat, I asked, what about it? It looked like it knew something the others didn't, she said. When we reached the aft deck, a photography crew had set up a backdrop to sell passengers the idea that the ship would preserve them at their best. The man in the linen jacket stood beside the reflector, not in front of it, talking to the photographer in a low tone that sounded like authority. The photographer nodded, adjusted her settings, nodded again. The linen jacket smiled and left a small tip, the way a person does when they wish to buy silence before it becomes expensive. He saw us then and didn't pretend not to. He crossed the deck like a man who has practiced arriving. Raphael, he said, offering his hand to me, and then to Claire. I'm in 1012. We share a hallway. Daniel, I said, and Claire. His glance flickered over our rings as if jewelry were a dialect he spoke. You two look like you deserve better coffee than this ship can manage, he said. If you come by the lounge at 9, I'll have them make something that doesn't taste like compromise. We're all learning to settle, Claire said. Not me, he said easily. I'm too old to start. He left a trace of cologne in the air, the kind labeled with words like salt and cedar and confidence. Claire watched him go and then looked at me, caught, and laughed. Should we go? She asked. Where? To where the coffee doesn't taste like compromise. We could also drink water, I said. We could, she said, if we were saints. We went. Raphael talked about nothing in a way that makes it sound like something. He had a portfolio of stories about cities where olive oil was better and women were kind enough to teach him the right words for the wrong reasons. He listened well, which is a currency misers never recognize. He asked what we did her, design, me, books, and asked the right follow-ups that suggested he could tell the difference between a job and a vocation. He spoke 3 languages badly and made a charm out of it. When he laughed, the staff laughed, which made me admire the staff. When he excused himself for a call, Claire watched him leave with an expression I pretended not to understand. He's the kind of man who's always the hero of his own revision, she said. And you admire that? I recognize it, she said. The ship docked in Funchal on the morning of day 3, hills patinated with terraced houses, bougainvillea rehearsing its crimes against restraint. We walked ashore with a shore excursion group, pretended to be moved by a wine tasting, I was, and learned the names of 2 couples from Stockport and a teacher from Hamburg who had decided to become interesting at 50. When we returned in late afternoon, the gangway pulsed with the particular mood of people who had decided to forgive the ship for being itself. At dinner, Raphael was absent. His table had a different linen jacket sitting in it, with a different pair of shoulders. Claire ate little. She pushed her fish into neat patterns the way people who fear disorder attempt to prove they can make it behave. Tell me what you're not saying, I asked. If I told you, she said, you'd want to fix it. Is fixing a sin now? Only when it's used as a weapon. Against what? Against listening, she said. We went up to deck 11 after, where the tracks circled the funnels and the wind had a doctorate in persuasion. The ship's lights braided themselves into a necklace that the island had no right to wear. Claire leaned on the rail and put her head on my shoulder, and we breathed in sync for 30 seconds. Maybe 45. Then her phone buzzed. She didn't look. It buzzed again. She lifted it and her face performed a small weather. She typed 3 words with her thumb and put the phone away like she had just fed a hungry animal and hoped it would leave before it learned the way to the kitchen. "Work?" I asked. "Something like it," she said. I didn't ask. This is how people lose each other. Not by forgetting to care, but by pretending curiosity is cruelty. That night at 2:13, I woke to the sound of our cabin door whispering shut. I lay there for a beat and listened to the air argue. Then I got up, pulled on jeans and a jacket, and did the unhandsome thing. I followed my wife. The corridor was empty, that special brand of empty found on cruise ships after 2 in the morning and in marriages after a year of hopeful lying. At the far end, the stairwell swallowed her, and I let the rubber soles of my shoes learn politeness. Down one flight, then another, to deck 7, the promenade. The moon was a clean wound, stitched into a sky that had agreed to cooperate. Claire stood by a lifeboat with a view of the dark, her phone held like a passport. A figure detached itself from the shadow beside her. It wasn't Raphael. It was the woman with the blue blazer in the clipboard, the guest relations manager. Her name tag, when it caught the light, said Marta. "Did anyone see you?" Marta asked, voice knife flat. "No," Claire said. "He doesn't know." Marta nodded, made a small adjustment to the cuff of her blazer, and handed Claire a keycard, the cheap kind printed in bulk, with the ship's name and a line for a number. "You place it under the flower arrangement in the lounge at 9, she said. "He will collect it at 9:05. You will be elsewhere." "I'm not sure, Wes," Claire began. "You're sure," Marta said, "because you're still here." You won. They move like a handoff in track, efficient, practiced, invisible if you don't believe in physics. When Marta turned to go, she looked directly into the shadow where I stood. Not at me, into it, like a person checking the time. She left. Claire remained, hands fixed to the rail as if she owed the ship taxes. I waited a count of 20 and stepped forward. "Who is he?" I asked. She startled, then didn't. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "It's our marriage," I said. "Where else should I stand?" She closed her eyes like a person hearing their name on a radio. "You were going to tell me," I said. "At dinner you were going to tell me." "No," she said, opening her eyes and meeting mine with a calm that made me feel like furniture. "I was going to ask you to let me finish something without deciding for me what it means. Is Raphael the point of this?" I asked. "Or just another symptom?" "Raphael is a shape," she said, "a kind you recognize because you want to measure yourself against it. This isn't about him." "Then tell me what it's about." She looked out at the dark as if it would improve if she stared long enough. "It's about owing someone a debt you didn't realize you'd incurred," she said, "and then learning the payment plan is different than the one you thought you agreed to." "You owe who?" She didn't answer. She began to walk. I followed. At 9 the next morning, she placed the key card under a vase of white lilies in the forward lounge. I was in a chair with a newspaper I didn't see. At 9:04, Raphael entered, did not look at us, did not look at the flowers. He walked to the pianola, lifted its lid as if to check the roll, palmed the key from beneath it instead, and left by a door a waiter used to forget about. 2 minutes later, Marta appeared and smiled at the lilies like she had been married to them once and decided to remain friends. By then, I had learned enough about coordinated movement to see the steps I couldn't name. I stood, put down the paper, and let the ship's architecture offer me excuses to pass through it. Down a flight, aft along a service corridor where the air smelled of detergent and boredom, and then starboard to the crew stairwell that led, according to a map mounted with a confidence bordering on arrogance, to Deck 5 crew access. "No guests beyond this point," the sign said. So I behaved like a man who has recently lost his point. The door to 5 was propped with a rag. Down here the ship forgot to be pretty. Exposed pipes, painted stripes on floors, the endless geometry of maintenance. Voices moved in blocks. Raphael spoke the dialect of money to someone behind a half-open door. I slowed. "1 hour," he said. "We'll be tied up at Santa Cruz, and I need the package before customs starts pretending to be honest." A second voice, the kind that drinks cigarettes for breakfast. "And the payment?" "You'll get your photograph," Raphael said. "Some debts aren't currency." Another voice now, female, precise. "This is already wrong, senor." Marta. "We're just moving a thing," Raphael said. The ship does it every day. This one happens to fit in an envelope. And if the person who thinks they own the envelope asks for his cut? Raphael's laugh was small and cruel. He's already had more of her than he deserves. I should have thrown the door open. I should have announced the name my mother gave me in the promises I was prepared to defend. Instead, I did the thing men do when the floor begins to slant. I waited for gravity to confess its plan. They moved. I moved after them. Past storage rooms, past the laundry's hot breath, into a narrow passage that smelled of fish. A security camera watched with the fatigue of someone who has recorded too many mistakes. Raphael turned left, Marta right. I followed Raphael. The passage ended at a small steel door with a keypad. He entered a code without looking. Inside a locker room, the kind designed for men who believe in uniforms. Raphael slid the pilfered keycard into a slot on a small gray locker, labeled 5C41, removed an envelope thick enough to be a sin, and placed it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he leaned into the mirror, adjusted his perfect mouth, and left by a different door than the one he came in. I stepped into the locker room after he'd gone, closed the door behind me, and looked at my face in the mirror. "What are you doing?" it asked. "Trying not to be an alibi," I said. In the corridor, footsteps. I slipped into the next room and found myself among crates stamped with destinations. Santa Cruz de Tenerife, Las Palmas, Cadiz. A man in a fluorescent vest counted, tapped, wrote, counted again. He didn't look up. I returned to the civilized layers of the ship and to my seat beside Claire and to the war of pretending. She looked at me like a person reading the weather. "You saw something," she said. "I saw enough," I said. "Tell me the rest." We went to our cabin where lies sound less professional. She sat on the bed and peeled the red scarf from her hair as if removing a bandage. "Before you, I dated a man who taught me to mistake intensity for love," she said. "It was loud and clever and exhausting and looked marvelous in photographs. He worked in import-export, which I believed because I wanted his shirts to keep telling the truth. When we ended, it was a door closing on a room that had never contained furniture. And then a year ago, he found me again. He said he needed a favor. He said it would keep other people safe. He said I was kind." "And you were," I said, because sarcasm behaves like cowardice in certain climates. I picked up envelopes from a drop and handed them to a person who didn't look like a criminal, because criminals rarely come labeled. I told myself they were contracts, invoices, whatever helps a man like that pretend he pays taxes. It was nothing until one day it wasn't. A message. "If you say no, I'll make trouble you can't clean up." And then he sent a photo from outside your office. I sat very still. "I tried to go to the police," and she said. "I went as far as their glass door and learned what courage weighs. I called Marta because we met once, fixing a reservation for my mother. She said the ship has its own gravity, that if something needed moving discreetly, it could be done with fewer people getting hurt than out there." "This is a ship," I said softly, "not a saint." "No," she said, "but it has walls and cameras and the habit of arriving on time. We made a plan to end it. This week on board, one last handoff. He thinks I'm still obedient. He thinks Raphael is still a friend. Neither is true." "You trust Marta?" "I trust that she's tired of men believing the rest of us enjoy choreography." "Why didn't you tell me?" She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, angry at them for betraying their training. "Because I knew you'd try to fix it," she said. "And the man I used to know, if he felt you near this story, he would light a match and call it justice." "Raphael." She shook her head. "Raphael is a delivery system for other people's appetites. The man from before is named Luca. He's boarding in Tenerife. He wants to see the chain work." "And you were going to let him?" "I was going to let him watch it break," she said. "You could have trusted me." "I am trusting you," she said. "Right now." The ship made Tenerife in a blue fit for gods. The island rose like a decision. A pilot boat kissed our bow and left a pilot who had learned to stand without showing the sea he was impressed. We tied up with ropes the size of old sins. Passengers disembarked to discover the version of themselves that buys hats. Claire and Marta met in a crew corridor to the side of normal life. I was not invited. I went anyway, as far as a fire door that reminded me gently about my mortality. When they emerged, Marta walked past me without acknowledgement, and Claire stopped, took my wrist, and squeezed, not warning, not comfort, more like an inventory. At 6, she said, in the lounge with the lilies, Luca will be there. He'll bring someone. Raphael will bring the envelope. Marta will bring a man who is either security or the kind of police who don't like to tell you which uniform they're wearing. Where will you be? Where you can see me, she said. And me? You will be sitting, she said, and not making yourself into the center of anything. At 5:30, the lounge filled with people applying alcohol to the complicated parts of their day. At 5:40, Raphael appeared in a suit that made the room feel underdressed. At 5:50, Marta took a chair where she could watch 3 mirrors at once. At 5:52, the pianist murdered a standard exquisitely. At 5:54, a man in a navy blazer with a face I had never seen walked in and moved through the room like a submarine noticed later, respected immediately. He sat at the far end of the bar, placed his phone on the counter, and ordered water with lime. At 5:59, Claire entered on the far side, hair pinned up, scarf absent, eyes so calm I wanted to set off a fire alarm to prove I could still influence something. And at 6, Luca arrived. He had aged the way men like him age, better than they deserve, and not as well as they believe. His smile flashed the teeth of a person who imagines his reflection makes the same sound. He looked at me the way a hotelier looks at a chair, useful if not currently relevant, and placed his palm on the piano as if consecrating the instrument. Raphael approached, envelope in hand, eyebrows behaving like punctuation. They shook like old collaborators auditioning for a judge. Luca took the envelope, weighed it, smiled. Then he leaned and said something to Raphael that made Raphael perform a laugh louder than necessary, because that is how men demonstrate loyalty to the wrong god. Marta lifted her chin a quarter inch. The man in the navy blazer, whoever he was, tilted his water toward a camera the way a priest tilts a chalice. I stood up without standing, leaned without moving, breathed without permission. Claire shifted to a position where Luca could see her. He turned, saw her, and every calculation in his body adjusted. He came to her slowly, which is the pace of predators who like to pretend they own time. "Claire," he said with a softness meant for juries, "you look—" He searched her face for a word he had the right to use and found none. "Well, you look inevitable," she said. He smiled. "And obedient?" "No," she said, "not anymore." He glanced toward Raphael, toward the envelope, toward the door that led to decks where money is better at hiding. "We're done here," he said. "Enjoy your vacation." Claire didn't move. "You once told me you wanted to be the last person to know the truth," she said. "Today is your lucky day." The man in the blazer stood, unbuttoned his jacket with the modesty of professionals everywhere, and walked toward Luca like someone going to collect a tax. A second man appeared from nowhere, which is the art of their kind. Marta moved to the pianist and touched his shoulder, and the music ended in a way that suggested grace rather than interruption. "Luca Peretti?" the man in the blazer said, low and friendly. "We'd like a word." Luca's smile did not leave. It simply lost weight. He looked at Raphael, found nothing. He looked at me, found furniture. He looked at Claire, found the one thing he had not rehearsed, a person who had decided to stop believing they owed him the courtesy of staying small. "I'm afraid you have me confused with—" he began. "No," the man in the blazer said gently. "We've been looking at you for some time." It did not become a scene. Good arrests rarely do. They asked him to walk, and he walked. Raphael tried to leave and discovered that the space around him had solidified into consequences. The envelope arrived in Marta's hand by way of a polite request and an impolite truth. The room breathed again. Someone ordered champagne in a voice that insisted on celebration. The pianist, relieved, chose a ballad that forgave everyone except the guilty. Claire sat. I sat. We looked at each other like people who had shared a bridge that did not collapse. "I should say I'm sorry," she said. "You should say you're okay," I said. "I'm okay," she said, and her face made it mostly true. We spent the rest of the evening in the way people do after something ends humanely. Walking the deck, checking for holes, listening for leaks. She told me everything she hadn't. I told her where I'd followed when I shouldn't. She did not punish me for it. We did not pretend love had been improved by a thriller. We simply admitted that this crisis had given us an honest language to speak a quieter problem. On the last night, the Ariadne threaded herself back up the Tagus and into Lisbon's open hands. Our suitcases sulked near the door. Claire stood at the rail with the red scarf in her hair, as if returning it to its job. "Do you want me to come home?" she asked, the way a person asks whether a room has the right light for reading. "Yes," I said, and then because I had learned something, "But not if you think coming home is a favor." She smiled, tired and clean. "I want to try," she said, "without secrets, without owing anyone anything. Even you." "Especially me," I said. We disembarked into morning. On the pier, men made the poetry of rope without knowing they were poets. Marta found us near the taxis, her blazer replaced by a sweater that admitted to being mortal. "He's going to jail for a while," she said. "Your Raphael will spend less time and learn nothing. The ship thanks you for your discretion." "We didn't do it for the ship," Claire said. "I know," Marta said, "but it moves better when people do the right thing." She hesitated, then handed Claire the cracked brass bell I hadn't realized she'd taken from me at some point along the longest day. "Keep this," she said. "Sometimes small sounds are the hardest to hear." We took a taxi to a hotel with a broken elevator and a good staircase. In the room, the city stretched itself beneath our window like a cat discovering purpose. Claire put the bell on the table between us. It made no sound. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Ask," I said. "If it had gone wrong, if he'd hurt you to punish me, would you have forgiven me?" The question did not deserve a quick answer. I thought about the sea and its tricks, about ships and their pride, about men who learn too late that pretending isn't patience. I thought about the red scarf and the lifeboats and the envelope that had finally chosen a better pocket. "I would have grieved," I said, "and I would have hated you for a while the way people hate mirrors for being precise. And then I think I would have forgiven you, because I love you and because hate is a tax I can't afford." Her face changed in the way faces change when they are given permission to become themselves again. She crossed the space between us and sat in my lap like a memory that had been patient. We kissed the way tired people kiss when they intend to keep living. The bell didn't ring. It didn't need to. In the months after, when the Ariadne was only a name on a piece of paper, and Lisbon was a photograph that made our kitchen window feel brave, we did the work that romance never advertises. We talked in rooms without scenery. We made promises small enough to keep. On Tuesdays, we chose each other on purpose. On Thursdays, we told stories about the versions of ourselves we were retiring. We learned to apologize before the other person made a case. We learned to keep a drawer for secrets we might someday be ashamed of, and to empty it every week without waiting to be asked. And sometimes on nights when weather argued with our old habits, I took the bell from its place on the shelf and set it on the table between us, and we listened to nothing together, which is love in a language I didn't speak until the sea taught me how. The ocean still keeps secrets, but ours are the kind water can't use against us anymore.